The principle of equal marriage really begins with the minority rights protections of the Charter of Rights. I'm Paul Martin. I was the 21st Prime Minister of Canada, and I brought in the Civil Marriage Act.
Well, the M&H case was foundational to the struggle for equal marriage. My name is Douglas Elliott. I'm a gay activist, and I was the lawyer for the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto in the same-sex marriage case.
Good afternoon, my lords and ladies. My name is Douglas Elliott, and I represent the Foundation for Equal Families.
Along comes M versus H, and a very young but very talented young lawyer named Martha McCarthy, who was hired by M to seek spousal support from her wealthy partner, H. M was penniless.
This issue is a political hotbed in which the stakes run high. The discriminatory treatment of gays and lesbians must be stopped, and no one apparently is going to do that but this court.
Thank you.
The Supreme Court of Canada, in an 8-1 ruling, said that common law couples' rights and obligations had to be extended to same-sex couples. That really propelled us almost to marriage. They said in the decision, we're not deciding marriage.
It was a very hopeful decision that we had another building block towards marriage, but that case was fundamentally about support payments for one female spouse towards another spouse. We knew that unless and until there was an actual marriage case, we wouldn't get to marriage, because fundamentally, marriage for same-sex couples was a political issue.
Hi, I'm Mike Stark.
Oh, I thought you were supposed to
say. So what I thought we would do is I'd say I'm Mike Stark. Hi, I'm Mike Stark.
And I'm Michael Leshner.
Better known as the Michaels.
And I'm let me just stop you. If I say I'm a retired lawyer and gay rights activist, it then kind of, doesn't it give me a power imbalance that Mike doesn't have?
I don't think so.
Okay. I'm a retired assistant Crown attorney and gay rights activist.
By the time M versus H was argued, I had really gotten to know some of the key lawyers and activists around this issue. Martha McCarthy and I were very good friends, and it began actually in the wake of M versus H. Martha said to me, maybe we can do a marriage challenge now. We hatched the plot. Martha was going to put together a group of couples who were going to pursue civil marriage, and I was going to approach the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto about doing religious marriage. Under the law, if they are a licensed church, they can use the publication of bans as a substitute for a license.
Good morning. My name is Brent Hotz, and on behalf of Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto, we welcome you to our service this morning. We hope that you'll
a
experience.
lot of the opposition to same-sex marriage has been religious. So to think that you could actually use religious means to have in the church a same-sex marriage, I think was, pretty good on their part. But we knew that it wasn't going, that wasn't going to be the end of the story. It was just kind of an interesting twist.
I published the banns of marriage between Kevin Barassa and Joe Varnell. If any of you know of any legal cause why these two persons should not be joined together in holy matrimony...
We did this announcement that we were doing the bans, and we were so shocked the first day. No one objected. I'll admit I had a tear in my eye. I was so surprised. There was kind of a sharp intake of breath, and then this huge round of applause, thunderous applause. People were so happy that there was no objection. Then we got a letter from the government saying, stop, cease and desist. This is an unlawful wedding that you're planning. But they didn't say what they would do if we went ahead. So I sent them a letter saying, what we're doing is protected by the Charter of Rights. We have no intention of stopping. Stop us if you wish. January 14th, 2001, a day I shall never forget, and I hope Canadians will never forget. I remember going to church that day in the morning for the church service. And there were mounted police, there were a lot of police, there were protesters wearing devil masks and with homophobic slogans on them. There had been a bomb threat. There had been death threats against Brent Hawks, our pastor. He was wearing a bulletproof vest. There were, the police tactical squad was secreted away in the basement of the church. We had used high security to get the couples there that day, and Brent. Brent didn't think he was going to live out the day. He's admitted that since. He called his family and said that he loved them and that they might not hear from him again. I've never seen anything like it. The front of the church was filled, on the right-hand side, was filled with cameras from all over the world. It was world-beating news that this marriage was taking place, because if it was legal, it was going to be the first legal same-sex wedding in the world. We were all really, really conscious of the fact that this was an historical moment.
Welcome all of you, and in particular, we welcome many special guests who are here with us today. Anne, I take you to be my lawfully wedded spouse.
Joe, I take you to be my lawfully wedded spouse.
To grieve with you in sorrow.
Grow with you in love.
Throughout our lives together.
Under the Vital Statistics Act, the church was required to submit the marriage documents for registration with the Ontario government, and the Ontario government was required to deposit them and to make them public, and then issue an official Ontario marriage certificate. So I told Brent, I think we need to submit these documents to the Ontario government. And Bob Runciman was the minister responsible at the time, and he said, I will not accept these for registration under any circumstances. And so we went to court.
It was fundamentally important that our freedom would come from the court, that would change the law. And because the law trumps Parliament.
We were saying, look, these people are married. The government won't recognize it. Why not? And it sort of pushed the onus back onto the government to explain. It was a long decision. We got the ruling. As I read each one, it dawned on me that the collective decision was, we won. And I looked up at Kevin and Joe and Brent, and I was shaking, and I said, we won, we won. And they were ecstatic. Everyone was ecstatic.
One of the three justices said we could marry right away. Two of the others said, no, we're going to give Parliament 2 years to change the law.
So that's a pretty resounding victory. So we took the opportunity, and Michael proposed to me.
Publicly. We didn't do anything in those days that wasn't public. But, you know, what I thought was very important at that moment, and I guess it crystallized in the public's mind, is here was a court decision. Here were two men who had been together since '81 who couldn't marry, where one of them turns to the other and says, will you marry me? And Mike said, of course I'll marry you.
We knew that there was going to be an appeal. To our surprise, the Ontario government decided not to appeal. Only the Canadian government appealed. So off we went to the Court of Appeal. They were very interested in all the arguments about, was there an alternative to marriage? Did Parliament have another option? And of course, our team argued that there was no other option, that only marriage is marriage. That's what excluding us from marriage is all about. It's about designating us as inferior human beings. That's why they want to try and give us something else. You might as well put the pink triangle on us again like the Nazis did.
They gave us, I think, 4 or 5 days advance notice that the decision was coming down. So then Michael kicked into gear.
We were given a date, and Michael and I went out, bought new suits, got rings. We were going to, if the decision was favorable, marry that day.
And of course, on June the 10th of 2003, we got the decision.
Decision day, June 10th. So Michael and I grab our suits in our little suit bags, hop on the Bay Street bus, and take the bus down to City Hall, and that's where we pick up the decision.
And we won.
And then I start singing.
Well, no, first you opened it.
Well, opened it, realized what had happened.
You go right to the end.
And I start singing the song from My Fair Lady. We're getting married in the morning. We all march out, and I'm singing this, and the press knows what's happening, and they're everywhere.
It was a unanimous decision. They all completely agreed, as opposed to the divisional court. To our great surprise, they said, effective immediately.
With this ring, I join my love with yours in marriage.
Yeah, it was an amazing, euphoric day. And it was like, here we are getting married
A
in
few
front of...
lawyers.
Yeah, but we're getting married really in front of...
ladies.
Getting married in front of the press. I mean, you've got like, you can't even imagine like all the cameras set up.
I love the fact that the cleaning ladies, who I had known for years, were there and they were clapping, and it's so primal an issue. You realize marriage is something that everyone understands from whatever culture, from whatever part of the world, and they would look at us and they just saw two happy people. It wasn't a local story, it wasn't a provincial story, it wasn't a national story, it was a world story.
At the end, Jean Chrétien said, well, the courts have spoken. We're Liberals. We have to go by the Charter. We're not going to appeal. Then we get a change in leadership. Then Martin took over as Prime Minister and Kotler became the Attorney General.
In terms of equal marriage, the courts were all over the place. There were courts deciding that equal marriage was on, and there were other courts that were deciding the exact opposite. But after a period of time, one court, that is to say, Ontario having decided in favor, then you had both Ontario and Quebec supporting equal marriage, and that was very important. And it was at that point that the government then said it was going to make a reference to the Supreme Court of Canada in order to determine that same-sex marriage was in fact constitutional.
God's way is clear. Marriage is for one man and for one woman.
This was a huge social debate while this was going on. Everywhere you went, everybody was talking about it. Everyone.
Each of us is here today because we believe that all love is equal, and all love is worthy of respect and recognition.
The government fundamentally, if it was going to go forth, did not want the question of constitutionality to be raised as an objection, and therefore went to the Supreme Court, made a reference to the Supreme Court on that issue.
They went to the Supreme Court of Canada to ask questions that they wanted the Supreme Court to answer, that everyone knew what the answers would be in advance, but it bought them time.
The Attorney General of Canada is attempting to get a decision, which he calls an advisory opinion, which he will then use as a kind of a battering ram against members of Parliament.
It is a political move. It's an attempt by the government to not rely on its own lawyers, but to get the 9 greatest minds in the country to say that this is legally valid. So it is political cover for the government in a way.
It will be ultimately up to Parliament to pass that bill or not. This is simply to provide advice to the Government of Canada about what is required by the Charter of Rights to protect the equality of gays and lesbians and what is required to protect religious freedom.
They think their legislation is valid. They just want to make sure. They want some guidance from the court. I think that's entirely appropriate.
It was the most strange and amazing hearing I've ever been at. The Supreme Court of Canada was packed. They turned the lobby into a media studio. I've never seen that before. Dozens and dozens of parties were allowed to participate in the hearing.
We're counting on our parliamentarians to defend the real nature of marriage, which is the union of one man and one woman, who are the only people who can actually bring forth children, the basis of our society today in Canada.
This is a human rights issue. This is a civil rights issue.
The definition of marriage is changed and constitutionalized as to include same-sex marriage. It will be open season on religious institutions.
They were not buying the arguments that were being made against the bill by the huge number of religious opponents who, again, were saying it was the end of civilization and God was going to rain down brimstone on Ottawa like Sodom and Gomorrah, and it was the end of everything.
My heart goes out to those who have to sit and listen to their rights being called into question again after they've been so definitively dealt with at the Court of Appeal.
And of course, we won. The court was unanimous.
Today, the Supreme Court of Canada has recognized that equal civil marriage for gays and lesbians is a right that flows from the Charter.
We had the right to say that the marriages performed on January 14th, 2001 were the first legal same-sex marriages in the world.
I think by allowing same-sex marriage, it's an acknowledgement that your relationships are just as valid and require the same rights and responsibilities as anyone else's. So it really, you know, we can talk about all these different things, but it really just comes down to basic equality.
Once the Supreme Court of Canada had spoken, the government was in a position to act.
Reading of Bill C-38, Loi sur le mariage civil.
Mr. Martin, Assalema, for Mr. Kotler, seconded by Ms. McClellan, moves that Bill C-38, an act respecting certain aspects of legal capacity for marriage for civil purposes, be now read a second time and referred to a legislative committee.
So Mr. Martin then introduced the Civil Marriage Act, and it was a very stirring moment in Canadian parliamentary history. And I dare say that the Prime Minister's speech was the finest one that he's ever given. It was from the heart, and it was powerful.
Our deliberations will not be merely about a piece of legislation or sections of legal text. More deeply, they will be about the kind of nation we are today and the nation we want to be. This bill protects minorities.
The Supreme Court ruled that, in fact, equal marriage would be constitutional. And I had decided, given the length of time that it really elapsed under this, that the time had come to act. And I brought in the Equal Marriage Act, and it passed, and the rest is history.
Same-sex marriages are real marriages. They're not pretend marriages. They're real marriages.
I am very proud of the Civil Marriage Act. I'm very proud of it for the reasons which I have stated. But it is not my legacy. It's Pierre Trudeau's legacy, because he brought in the Charter of Rights. And I'll tell you who else's legacy it is. It is the countless number of men and women over the course of the last 30 or 40 years have not been afraid to come out of the closet and say, this is who I am, this is what I'm about.
The public would say, oh, you're so courageous, you're so this or that. And I think the public realized the only self-interest we had was that we loved each other, wanted to marry, and live our lives as best we could.
We also wanted to make this world a better place for people coming up. Even to this day, 14 years later, we still have people who will stop and say, are you the Michael? And they'll say, thank you.
The people of Canada have worked hard to build a country that opens its doors to include all, regardless of their differences. If we do not step forward, then we will step back. And if we do not protect a right, then we deny it. Together as a nation, together as Canadians, let us step forward.